Hi guys, my name is Sierra and I'm going to walk you through some of the great world building features that Cinema 4D has to offer. I'm going to walk you step by step in the process of how I was able to create the scene you are seeing now with Cinema and Procreate combined. Let's get started. Alright, so world building is a super fun process in which you get to control the storytelling like composition, lighting, and color. What we're going to be tackling today is how to smoothly integrate cinema into a 2D workflow for better environment designs. We're going to be using simple steps to start building a great 3D composition. I'm going to be going over Redshift cameras and light to enhance the scene. Then finally, I'll be going over Procreate to show how I finished the scene. Some websites to keep in mind are TurboSquid, Kitbash, and Polygon. I'll be using free models from TurboSquid. Kitbash and Polygon are great for more advanced world building, but for this presentation, I'm only going to be using free assets with no textures applied. So a little bit about myself. I've been freelance illustrating for a couple years now on top of doing motion graphics. Ever since I was a kid, I've always been obsessed with cartoons and wanted to make a career out of it. I moved to LA from Ohio about 2 years ago and have been loving the creativity and opportunities that it has offered me. I love visual storytelling and bringing characters to life using lighting, colors, composition, and perspective. So about 2 years ago, I stumbled upon a term called visual development and I was instantly hooked. It basically combines world building and storytelling together to start creating a new and exciting world, ranging from prop designs to whole concept art. And Disney definitely has a lot of cool examples with this with their feature films. So moving into my 3D work, I've always loved enhancing my creativity. I rarely like to stay focused on one specific medium, and I definitely felt that 3D could build up my illustration portfolio. Alright, so here's my demo reel of some past motion graphic projects that I've worked on. So when I say that Cinema is a powerful software and easy to use, I definitely mean it. Just within 3 months of learning the program, I was able to take my art abilities to new levels. Cinema has helped me visualize things in motion and in 3D space. With world building still being a fairly new topic that I've been tackling, Cinema has made it super easy to compose and light scenes without the hassle of worrying about perspective. I'm able to create scenes instantly that would originally have taken me twice as long to do without having this tool. It saved me countless time and I've been able to be a much quicker artist. What's also nice to mention is the fact that you can create one scene and have infinite possibilities with the location design and storytelling process. With the scene I'm going to be making today, I started off with composing buildings and free assets to create a simple version of a city and choose the best camera angle to portray the scene. I then went on to outline rough line work to add in missing details. From there, I put in some rough color to figure out the color scheme. And then I proceeded to block in colors on different layers to kind of fill in the rest of the scene. So then with all of that, I was able to add in the final texture, lighting, and details. Alright, so now that we've covered the basics of composing the scene, let's jump into Cinema and start world building. Alright, so now that we're in Cinema, this is what a new project will look like. I'm using R23, just for a side note. So kind of what the interface looks like. This will be the middle where all the assets will appear. Over here is where all of the objects will show up in hierarchy order. Then up here you have tabs ranging from deformers to objects that you can click and hold down and look through. And then you have your move tools, scale, rotate, which I can show you the hotkeys for in a second. I do recommend, if you're brand new to cinema, to look online for some beginning tutorials to help jumpstart you with the interface. I started off using Cineversity to help me. It's an online cinema website with tons of creative artists. There's a great beginning tutorial from an artist named EJ that goes over a lot of basic cinema, which helped me tremendously. Okay, so from here, I think I'm going to go into the content browser. So it's located over here, or you can locate it under Window Content Browser. Cinema has a really good feature. If you click on this and go down to Presets, and then you have the option of these different things, you can choose between these two. So 3D objects, and as you scroll down, you notice there's a ton of different models that you can choose from. Since I'm doing an environment outdoor scene, I'm going to choose the buildings, and I'm going to go into Lanius. So you can scale up the models just to see, but right away you can tell that there's a lot of cool different types of models you can choose from. One model that caught my eye that started the scene was this. I wanted to make a fall scene, so having something like this kind of jump-started my brain into a really cool scene. So now that I have this placed into the interface, you can see it's present. I just double-clicked on that and it appeared here. A good rule of thumb to have when you're placing new objects into a scene is you want to make sure that the size is compared to what cinema is thinking of. So what I mean by that is if I click on this, I go to plane, and right away you can tell that this building is a bit too big for cinema to handle if I wanted to create a bigger scene, mostly just for rendering purposes, but it's a good habit to have. So what I can do is I can click back on this building and scale it down. But before I do that, since this is an object that I'm not too familiar with, I'm going to go back into the Objects tab and just make sure once you click on that, that there's no extra things that will get lost if I start scaling and rotating stuff. So, okay, so some of the hotkeys that you can use to move this object, rotate it, scale it. So right now these arrows indicate that it is in the move tool. So you can move it up, down, everywhere. And if you want to move it somewhere but then decide you want to move it back, you can Control Z and it'll bring you straight back to your last movement. So, okay. So from here, I want to switch between rotate, so that is the R, and going back to the move, that is E. So E is for the move, R is for rotate, and then T is for scaling, which is what I want to do. So clicking outside of this range, you can scale the entire thing down and just sort of match it to what this plane looks like. And I'm going to go back to E to move it back into place. So now that I have that somewhat formed, okay. And I do want to go back and scale it, so just because I'm making more of a cartoony scene, I want to kind of push the boundaries of what these objects look like in these buildings. Maybe I'll make this a little bit longer. Nothing too crazy, but just enough to give it a cool, different style. All right, so now I have the first thing in place. I'm going to start adding in some more buildings to start creating this little Halloween town. I'm going to use this building next. Going to scale it down. I'm going to move it over here. I'm going to try to replicate as much as possible the scene that I had originally, but it might not look exactly the same. A good thing too to know is that if you want to rotate in increments of 5 or 10 or 15, whatever, you just hold down Shift and rotate and it'll snap it in place to what this grid is. So that's good to have, especially with buildings. They're pretty much uniform. Okay, so I think what I was mentioning before with this, so some of these objects will have multiple types of props with it. So if you click down on this, you'll notice that there's a ton of different things. So if I were to move and I click on something, but I don't have the entire thing clicked on, just this, it'll move this, but nothing else. So what we want to do is hold down the top one, and then we're going to scale this up just not super obnoxiously, but just enough to make it look like it's not just a normal building. A little bit more cartoony. All right, so now that I got that in, I'm just gonna kind of quickly go through and just start adding in more buildings. I don't think I have any more from this. I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna go to the, where is it? Buildings. I'm gonna go to cities. So I like this building. I'll put this in and scale this down. Rotate. Scale. Okay. Closer. Oh, take this. Okay. So that's next to that. And then I think I want some buildings further away. There's a really good, if I can find it. This one. This one's pretty nice. Take this down. I think the thing with world building that I really enjoy is that growing up, I loved playing The Sims, and this is like right up my alley because I never liked actually playing The Sims. I always loved making the buildings pretty and, you know, like decorating the interior. So I feel like world building like this is kind of similar in that aspect where it's a little tedious, but it saves you countless time and struggle. So I feel like without this, I would just be scribbling in perspective buildings until I got something that kind of looked right, where this right off the bat, it perspective-wise, you get the building structure down properly. Okay, now I'm going to add, I think this will be the last building I add in, and then I'm going to move on to some more of the assets. Okay. And yeah, once you get down the hotkeys, it makes the world building a lot quicker in that process. All right, so I think I got a decent composition down. That's what we're trying to look for. So this is going to be the main focus of the piece, since this will be a little Halloween town shop where people get their Halloween costumes. And I want this to be the focal point. So keeping in mind that when we're making all of these buildings, we're trying to set a cool storytelling scene, but not have this building completely get hidden by everything else that's going around it. And keeping in mind composition too, I kind of wanted it off to the side where it's kind of in a rule of thirds position where there's a grid and it's kind of meeting that one part of the grid, and there's something up here that might be catching the eye as well. Okay, so from here, I'm going to start to scale this up just because I want a bigger ground plane. So I can use these little circles here. Even if I'm not in the scale tool, I can still scale those up if I have my mouse clicked on this little circle here. So just enough to get the idea that there is a ground plane. Okay, and from there I'm going to make a sidewalk. So just a simple model of a cube. I'm going to put this on the scene. And doing that same technique, I'm just going to click on this and I'm going to squish this down and then stretch this out pretty far. And let's see where this is in the scene. Okay, so I'm going to move this down a little bit. A little thick still. I'm going to scale it down just a tiny bit more. Okay, so now that I have that in place, I'm going to duplicate it by holding down Control and the arrow, and once you see this little 2 squares icon, you click down and you push out the object and then you unclick, and now you have 2 of the same thing. So I'm going to rotate that. Okay. I'm just gonna, whoops. I'm going to place this one over here. A little bit further back. And I'm gonna start duplicating some more just because there's a lot of sidewalk. And then I think I'm gonna duplicate 2 more. Okay. 1 more. I'm going to skinny these up a bit. Pretty much the main point of this is just to figure out perspective of how the sidewalk is going to look at different angles. Okay, so I got the pretty much basics down of this. Okay, now I want to move on to implementing assets that I downloaded from TurboSquid online into the scene. So Cinema likes FBX and OBJ files, so just keep that in mind when you're looking at stuff online to download. So to start giving the city a little bit more of a livable feel to it, I'm going to put in a light. The nice thing about R23, or before this, you would place in an object and you'd have to merge it later. But in the newer version, you just hold down Shift and take whatever object you have. Here, I'll show it in the scene. Whatever object you have, I'm going to put in the light. You click on it, drag it over. If you hold Shift and let it go, this thing will pop up, which everything is pretty much good. And it'll appear right into your scene, which is pretty great because before it would be a little bit of a hassle, not too much, but just enough to shut off a couple seconds. So that's nice. So let's scale this down. I'm just going to place this throughout the scene. Take this. Let's place it right here. And then I'll duplicate that. Create another one. Just enough to get kind of feel that there's some lighting going on in the city. I think that's good. Okay, so now I'm going to add in some other objects, which is up here. I'm gonna just move this over since I showed the first time. Let's add in a bench. So I'm going to do the same thing as before. I'm going to take the object, put it in, hold shift. Now it's in the scene. I'm going to go back to objects just to see what's going on outside of that. Okay, and I think this might be a case, oh, never mind. I thought it was going to be a lot smaller than the scene. Okay. I don't know if you saw too before, if you have something clicked and you don't know where it is in the scene, there's a nice little arrow here that kind of points you in the right direction of where the object is placed in the scene. Okay, I'm gonna skip this down. I didn't put a bench in the other one, but this would have been nice to have. I feel like people need to sit down in a town sometimes. Okay. It's over here. Maybe there's like a little bus stop over here. I think I do have a sign for a bus stop, which I don't know where it is, but I'm gonna put some trash in here now. I feel like this is more of the fun part where you can just, you find a bunch of assets online, and I mean, all of these assets that I'm putting into the scene, they're all free. So it's definitely easy to find stuff like this. You just have to kind of look around, and sometimes when you get free stuff, it's not the greatest model, but for this case, I just need the structure of what the object's going to look like. Okay, so I got that. I'm going to, I'll duplicate this once. Put this over here. Okay, I got some of those in there. Now, my favorite asset that I found online, of course, since it's fall, I'm going to add in a pumpkin that I found. And sometimes too, these models that you find online, they'll come with a ton of stuff that you don't need, so you can just delete those. And if it looks like this, usually it's just a weird texture that didn't get placed over properly, which when I saw the texture online, it actually didn't look that great, so I was surprised that this looked so much better without the texture on it. Whoop. Sorry about that. Okay. So now I've got this gigantic pumpkin, which, I mean, it would be pretty great to keep it like that because it's pretty cool. Maybe actually what I could do, I didn't do this for the last one, but I don't know if that could be cute to have this huge pumpkin on top of it, and maybe it says Happy Halloween in it. I kind of dig it. I'll keep it like that. It doesn't look like that in the final version, but whatever. Alright, so I'm just going to duplicate this a couple times. Definitely not the same size though. Let's lower this down. So these are going to be some of the pumpkins up front. And I mean, this is, I mean, I kind of know how to draw pumpkins without placing them in the scene, but it kind of helps my brain not have to think so much about tons and tons of assets. And plus it does kind of help with composition too, because I have a ton of other stuff like crates and tombstones and stuff that I'm going to place out front here. Let's see. I'm going to duplicate this one more time. And then the same thing like before with the scaling, you can kind of squish them, stretch them out, make them look kind of funky. Okay, I kind of like that. So now I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to put in this gate. I think I remember this gate being kind of cool. Yeah. I'll put this out here. I'm gonna scale it down a little bit. I think I'm gonna have it over here this time. Last time I had it on the opposite side, but I think it'd be fun to have it placed somewhere else. I'll scale it up too and see how that looks. Nah, I'll scale it back down. Maybe I'll make it like really tiny. Okay, and I'll just duplicate this a little bit just to go back to this one. That's good. I think I want to add in one more thing. I'm going to go back to the content browser because there's a couple cars that I want to put into the scene as well. And I kind of want to show you what cars I have. I used this bike a couple times because I feel like bikes are pretty hard to draw, especially from different angles. So it's kind of nice to have. You can always go online too. There's a lot of free stuff as well. These are a little bit more realistic kinds of cars, but it works for this because I could scale it to a different proportion. I'm going to save this real quick just in case, because there are a lot of pieces to this. Okay. So now here's this car. Let's rotate it this way. I'm going to scale it down. And for this, since there's a lot going on, it kind of is a bit forcey to scale it down. I think it's just there's a lot of stuff to it. Okay, so, but see, like I said, before it was a actual functioning car, and now it's like a clown car. I'm gonna put it over here. Let's see, and I don't need any of the textures that appear down here, so I can just delete those, and now it's just this. Although I think for the windows, which was kind of nice since there are different, let me see. So this van, so it has like all of these different things within it, and if you click on certain things like this window and delete it, it shows you the inside of it. So if you know the basics of like drawing in a window, it's kind of nice to see the interior of the car, so that way you can draw what's inside of it. I don't know if I can erase the front window. It doesn't look like it. It kind of seems like it's all going to... Well, no, nope, I found it. Okay, let's delete that. Okay, cool. So now I can see kind of like the steering wheel and everything, so it's easier for me to draw that in. So I kind of like that as is. I might move it around here and there. That's what's nice about cinema, is that when you're placing stuff in the scene, you can move pretty much anything you want to make the best kind of composition. Where if I were to be drawing this like from scratch, I would have to constantly be moving everything and erasing. Okay, maybe I'll put in one more thing and then I'll move on to Redshift. What sign is this? Oh, what is this? Okay, I mean, that could be cool. I was thinking of more of like a big sign up here, but that's fine. Maybe this will be a sign sticking out to indicate that this is the Halloween store. Oh, that's cute. Okay. I think I like how the scene's going. Obviously, I would take a little bit more time to work through the scene and put in different types of objects so that it makes it easier for me to draw it in later. But just for like the gist of the world building process, this is kind of the idea what you're going for. I also do put in some trees, and I do that from Forester, which is a side plugin that I have on a different version of Cinema that I don't have up here, unfortunately, but You definitely don't need it to put trees in here. You can find pretty much different types of trees online for free. Okay, so now that I have everything in the scene that I want to, what I'm going to do is now go into Redshift. It's a really great plugin for cinema rendering. It's up here in the corner. Usually all plugins will be up here. What I'm going to do is just click down on it, and I'm going to start off by putting in a camera. So for this, I'm just going to use a standard camera. And right now, we're not in this camera. So what I want to do, you just go over to here, and once this is highlighted, then it shows that you are in this viewport. And right now, you don't see anything what this camera is showing you, and that's because we haven't enabled the render view just yet. So what I'm going to do is click on that, and this little window pops up. So what I can do is press play on that, and then it's going to take a little bit, and now it has the scene up for us, which is great. And instead of putting this off to the side, what I think I'm going to do for this is I'm just going to dock it down below. So in order to do that, what I need to do is just click on this, and then move it over here, and kind of like with Adobe, it moves it wherever you want. I'm just going to place it in here, and so now we can see it. This area, so I'm just going to move this down just a tiny bit. Okay, so now that we have this, I'm going to save this real quick too, since there's a lot of stuff in my scene, and having this open, it's nice to save often just because there's a lot of stuff rendering. Because what this does is when I move this around, it actually moves kind of like in a real-time sense where everything is being rendered out constantly. Okay. So now that I have the camera in place, what I'm going to do is go over some of the cool camera features within this. So pretty basic. So what I'm going to do, you have a lot of options for these different types of cameras. And I'm going to select out of it real quick. So what you can do is just click on that. And now you're outside of the camera. So when I zoom out of it, this is kind of what the viewport is seeing. This is what the camera kind of looks like. Okay, so now when I switch over between these different types of cameras, when I go to a super wide, this is what it kind of captures. And then when I go back into the camera, this is what it's going to look like. So between this and between the camera that we originally started off with, you can kind of see how the camera is capturing through the lens what the final render would look like. And then with the super tele, it zooms in super far, and I'm going to showcase that. Yeah. So depending on what kind of camera angle you want, you have a lot of different options to choose from, which is really great. So I'm going to go back into the camera, and I think for this, I'm kind of fine with the 36. I think that looks perfect for what I'm going for. Okay. This is another thing that's really great to have in mind, especially with composition. I usually like to turn on the grid mode. It's nice to show kind of like a rule of thirds, where something up here in the corner will have some sort of interest, and something down here will have interest as well, or something like dead set in the center, which is great. So something like this, if I were to have a cool angle up here of the little Halloween store, maybe there's something going on up here, just playing with the angle and stuff is pretty great. And this is why I really enjoy cinema and doing these rendering engines, is that you can see all the different possibilities, all the different ways you can try and draw out the scene and not be limited to one certain angle. All right. One tip to keep in mind about the camera settings. So say if I found an angle that I really enjoyed, and then I accidentally started to move the camera around and tried to just look at some of the objects, and then I realized that I was moving my camera. A really helpful tip to keep in mind, it's kind of like the undo button, but for the camera. So for PC, it's Control-Shift-Z. And however many times you press Z, you'll go back to your original spot where you left off. So it's a really nice feature to have, especially for me when I sometimes forget that I'm in my camera and I think, oh my gosh, I'm never going to get that same angle ever again. Well, that hotkey definitely saves me quite a bit of struggle. And going a step further, I think another great thing to have with this camera, under here, there's a lot of tags that, the one tag that I'm going to go for is it's under the rigging tags. So there's this tag called protection. And once it's applied to either an object or camera, when I start to move around in this, I'm frozen. There's no way that I can move around in this scene anymore with this camera. But once I unselect it, then I can move around. So that's kind of nice to have too. So that way you don't have to undo your camera angles. You are already set in place pretty much like a lock. So now that I've gone over the basic camera settings, what I'm going to do next is light the scene. So in Redshift, under Objects, there is this thing called Sun and Sky Rig. And when I place it into the scene, right away you can see that it's almost registered as an outside sun scene. It's not perfect just yet, and that is because there are no textures on top of these objects. So right now, it's not registering it as what it could be. So what I'm going to do is create a new material under the Redshift tab, click on Materials, Material. So it's going to pop up like a general material. I'm going to go down the list and I'm just going to select everything. And a nice thing about this is that if you right click on the actual texture, hit apply, it will apply all the textures on there for you. And right now it kind of looks like some sort of weird SpongeBob Future Chrome, but we're going to fix that in a second. So since I have the material selected, here are some of the properties for it. I'm going to put this menu down since this is kind of in the way. I'm going to squish it up just a tiny bit. Okay, so down below there's a couple options for this. The one option that I'm looking for is the reflection, which is pretty high right now. I think it's on the highest setting. So if you go into the roughness down here, you can just take this up quite a bit, and then it transforms the scene into a much better outcome of what I want. And then I think for the final thing, I'm going to go back into the Redshift sky, and you don't have to move this around at all. It's pretty much set in place, kind of like a dome. What you can do is go to the rotating setting, and what you can see in the Redshift render view when I start to rotate it is that it starts to mimic what the sun will do. And let's see if I can find the sun since it's behind here. If I rotate this down just a little bit, maybe rotate this over to... Oh, it's so close. That's actually really cool. So yeah, I'm basically just rotating this around and just figuring out what kind of cool composition, cool shadows. What's really nice too is that as an illustrator, I feel like shadows are a big struggle, especially with huge buildings like this. And you know, there's shadows being cast on different objects, and just figuring out how that works in relation to everything. It just helps so much. I mean, this is kind of interesting too. I had something similar to this where I had the light coming from this angle and through the street. I think I want to change the camera angle a little bit, and I could, I think I'm just going to delete this right now since this is almost over. Something like this, I think. Maybe I could also do a higher up perspective. Maybe like what I did before. Or maybe there's some interests happening like this. And that's kind of cool. There could even be maybe someone standing up here. Maybe like there's a little party going on up here. And then maybe there's a couple windows open. Maybe there's a door open showing that there's something here. So there's just a ton of endless possibilities. So now that you have a scene that you're kind of happy with and you're happy with how it looks and you want to render this out, what you're going to do is go back into the cinema settings up here. There's a little tab with a gear on it. These are the render settings. The only three things that you really need to look for. So in output, you can figure out what kind of width and height that you want in it. I tend to go for 1920 by 1080. It just makes it a lot easier and a little bit more crisp, but it's not super large to render out. So going into the saving options, you click on your file, wherever you want to save it out to. Your format, you have a lot of different options to choose from. That's pretty much for that. And then the final thing is making sure that whichever render setting you're on, that you put it to redshift so that it will look exactly like that. Standard and physical are more for cinema, which I've used physical quite a bit, and I think it's really great. Just to keep in mind that you don't need to have an outside plugin to pretty much capture the same effect, but I'm so used to plugins now. So now that we have all those options, all you have to do is click on this guy, and then it'll start to render your page. All right, so now that we have this up and ready, I already have something already saved out from a previous render of this. So let's jump over into Procreate and see how the finishing touches add up. All right, so now I'm going to showcase the time-lapse video of the scene I drew and go step by step with how I completed it with tips and tricks along the way. Once getting into Procreate, my first order of business is to map out the rough line work to capture as much detail as possible. This step is crucial in order to move on to the next step, so I always take my time with the line work. Having cinema overlaid in this process does help make things go so much quicker since I don't have to think as much about the perspective and can focus on more details. A couple brushes I like using in this stage is the Studio brush and the Tinderbox brush. For the smoothness of the brushes to give better line work, I go into the brush settings to fix the streamline to make better fluid strokes. I tend to switch between those settings a lot, depending on what I need. For a sketchier quality, I turn that off, and if I want final line work, I turn that on. For this painting, I knew I wasn't going to keep the line work for later, so I just kept it as a rough version. And like I mentioned before, this step should be taken slow in order to get everything mapped out correctly. I've been getting into such a fun holiday spirit for Halloween this year, so making the scene has been an absolute blast. It definitely makes your art process a lot better when you're drawing things that you're passionate about. It's taken me a long time to get where I am in my art journey, but I've always loved drawing and being creative, so I'm glad that I added cinema to this mix to enhance my drawing skills. And then once I start wrapping up the line work, then I move on to the coloring. So jumping into the rough painting phase, where I tend to use one layer just to quickly map out some of the possible colors for the piece, I tend to not keep most of the colors that I place into this rough painting scene, but I just want to figure out real quickly how the scene could look, and then I start going into the blocking process of it. To me, the blocking process is the most tedious thing to do, but it helps to put things on different layers to make your final coloring process that much quicker and less destructive. Procreate has a nice bucket tool that makes it quick to drop in colors as long as your lines are connected. The only issue I have with Procreate in making a huge scene like this is that my layers are limited depending on how big my canvas is, so I have to be mindful of just how many layers I should use. Once all the colors are blocked in, then I move on to the texturing process. For me, the texturing process has always been the most enjoyable part of the process. I tend to use a couple different texture brushes depending on what kind of texture I want to use. I tend to use a lot of the paint brushes, especially the jagged brush. It gives a nice painterly feel and has a cool stamp to it. I also use the spray paint brush just to give a great noise texture feel to it. Like I mentioned before too, I use alpha lock and clipping mask quite a bit, so having the layers separated ahead of time saves me a lot of headache. Alpha lock is nice if you're crunched on layers, meaning it works just like a clipping mask, but the end process will be a bit destructive, whereas the clipping mask is above the original layer and won't harm it if you decide to get rid of it later. Also, throughout this whole process, I'm trying to figure out what colors look good within the scene. It's a bit of a hassle to figure out what colors work, but being able to easily change colors along the way helps when you have separated layers. I tend to lean more towards natural looking colors when placing them in the scene. I also use the adjustments layers a lot to brighten up my colors a bit. Sometimes when you're coloring a scene for so long, you tend to accidentally dull the scene. Just going through the layers and using the hue, saturation, curves, and contrast help push objects back into the scene and bump certain objects to the front. Procreate also added in some new filters that are pretty cool, but for the scene, I didn't mess with those settings as much. Another side note to have when making a huge scene like this is to always research ahead of time and have tons of references. I use Pinterest quite a bit and have tons of boards for visual development and character design. I also follow a lot of industry artists in the field, so I have a better idea on the artwork they're producing at major studios in order for my artwork to become a lot better. And then once I have the texturing process down, then I finally add in the final touch, the lighting and shadows. Using the overlay blend mode and multiplier mode, for the light, I tend to use a light airbrush with a pastel yellow. I feel gives a nice warm feel to it. For the shadows, I tend to pick a medium purple with a hard brush mixed in with more of a painterly brush, since shadows tend to be harsh lines mixed with soft lines. I tend to mix brushes for that process. And it's really all about experimenting throughout the piece and just trying to figure out what works best for you in your own process. And that's pretty much the final step of the presentation, guys. It's been a lot of fun going through the process of world building in cinema, and hope that you'll be able to walk away with some knowledge of my process in illustrating. If you guys want to keep up with me and my art journey, you can follow me on my Instagram. I usually post twice a week at least, just to keep my skills up. I'm usually posting a ton of cute stuff as well. And you guys can also check out my website here, just sierrawardstudio.com, and you can see all of the newer stuff that I posted. Again, guys, thanks so much for tuning in. Thank you, Maxon, for letting me be a presenter. It's been an honor. Hopefully everyone has a great rest of your Adobe Max, and I look forward to creating more content and artwork for you guys to enjoy. Cheers.